Hi everyone. What I'm going to do in this video is speak about the current Pluto-Mars opposition in light of the current election season here in the US. Perfect, thank you. There's a lot to say here. Obviously, this Pluto-Mars, many of us know, we are soon to have our first opposition. This is happening on the 3rd of November, just 2 days before the election, at 29 degrees Cancer Capricorn. But we're soon to enter into a very new ecosystem. This is Mars entering Leo, and then soon thereafter Pluto entering Aquarius, where we're going to have ultimately 2 more oppositions. It's very meaningful to consider this ongoing movement of Mars and Pluto in light of the current election season. I'm not a mundane astrologer. This video isn't going to be about predictions. Usually I don't bring in too many worldly events because I want what I'm sharing to feel more universal, right? So we can access it and relate to any part of our own lives. But I feel this is actually very helpful. It is sometimes useful to bring in worldly events and worldly dynamics because what's happening politically in the US is also a reflection of what's happening everywhere in the world and what's happening in here. And I think the Pluto-Mars dynamics are a very illustrative way to speak to what's beginning to emerge. So I will be sharing my thoughts on just the election season, what I think is going to be happening, but more importantly, I'm going to be speaking about the ongoing evolutionary dynamics that are emerging with the ongoing Pluto-Mars opposition as Mars moves into Leo. So as I speak, I'm going to be at times referencing an article that I'm working on. This article will be my next newsletter that I'll send out next week. So I will often write newsletters along with these videos. If you'd like to receive this newsletter and all future articles in your inbox, you can subscribe to that in the description below. I'm going to share one announcement before I jump in. So next week, I'm actually going to begin my Planets That Square the Nodes class series. And here we have the individual class, Pluto Square the Nodes. You can enroll in each individual class, or you can enroll in the entire series. This series will be happening, it's a 12-class series that begins on Wednesday with Pluto Square the Nodes. The essence of this series is focused on the technique that Jeffrey Wolf Green taught in Planets That Square the Lunar Nodes. We're going to be practicing and applying, understanding what does it mean when a planet squares the lunar nodes. What are the specific karmic dynamics that are implied in that? What are the teachings? How can we resolve it? What's the underlying intention when we see this in a natal chart? So each class will be focused on an individual planet with many examples, working with many different nodal situations, unique and different configurations. So you can enroll for $299 or just $75 a month for 4 months for the entire series. And again, you can just enroll in individual classes starting with Pluto next week. I also have a free intro class that's actually a requisite. So you can access that free intro class right here. It's a very useful class where I go over the whole philosophy and the technique here so we can really understand this before we jump into the individual planets. Okay, so you can check all of that out in the description below. So I'm going to start this stream with just giving an overview of the movement of these planets over the next several months. And then I'm going to speak about what it means for Mars to be transitioning from Cancer into Leo and how to understand this upcoming Mars, Leo, Pluto, and Aquarius opposition in light of what's happening here in the US. Okay, so here we have, let me pull this up on my end. Right here. This is November 5th. The day of the election. Again, just less than 2 days prior to the November 5th elections, we have the exact Mars-Pluto opposition. Then Mars enters Leo like that day or the next day. So Mars is freshly in Leo, just beyond the first opposition to Pluto, and just weeks before stationing retrograde in Leo. Obviously, this is a very powerful energy. The next date I want to highlight is the inauguration date, which happens on January 20th. Here we have Mars has regressed back into Cancer at that point and is opposite Pluto. And on that day, actually, the sun is joining with Pluto. So those days are also very charged, very activated with Sun on Pluto as well. Finally, we have in April, Mars returns to Leo and returns to where it will be on election day itself. And just about a week later, Mars will exact its final of 3 oppositions with Pluto. So what this says is from November until April, we have a very, 5-6 month window where this Pluto-Mars energy, in particular in the Leo-Aquarius axis, is incredibly activated, incredibly emphasized. Obviously, this says a lot. Again, we're moving into a new ecosystem, so I'm going to highlight what it means for these planets to be moving into the fixed axis and really just flesh out what is the evolutionary intention and what's really beginning to emerge within and without at this time. Let's start by understanding the nature of Mars. As a quick review, it's always really helpful to kind of ground ourselves in the basics. And I think there's always infinite value in just kind of coming back to beginner's mind. Mars is about action. Mars always corresponds to the leading edge of our evolutionary growth relative to the choices that we're making. It's stimulating. It's both the content arising in our life and how we're choosing to respond to it, and also how we are instigated from within to make new choices moment to moment. Mars, inherently on its own, is not necessarily refined or self-aware. So there's a process with Mars where we make choices, oftentimes acting in a very instinctive way, maybe fear-based way, impulsive way, but then we learn from it. We learn, okay, this is what it's like when I act this way, or when I act upon my impulses, or when I'm quick to react, right? We refine that. Ideally, the Mars evolutionary process for all of us, both in our natal charts and in transit, is an ongoing process of refinement. We become progressively more aware of how am I acting, what am I acting for, and where am I going with this, right? Are my choices taking me to where I want to be and who I want to become in life? And when we're dealing with the Mars-Pluto opposition, the core dynamics really speak to our actions relative to the deeper, unconscious, fundamental psychological dynamics that are at the core of our own life. Pluto itself speaking to our deepest fears, our attachments, the psychological content that we're working out here. So we're going to be triggered. The nature of this time is triggering. We're going to feel instigated. We're going to be feeling the need to choose and to make choices and to respond. There's something to be acting for, but we won't necessarily know why I'm acting that way or really where it's going to go. There's an evolutionary process here of becoming more self-aware and refining the nature of our actions long term. That's just the general nature of this Mars-Pluto dynamic. Mars moving from Cancer to Leo is a very powerful shift. So think of like the child in that incubation phase, staying at home and then going to preschool for the first time. Suddenly they're in an environment where they exist, they're seen, they're standing on their own as an individual creative being. There's an immense amount of self-awareness relative to Mars and Leo in our unique individual self. I exist. I have a unique purpose. Am I special? Am I important? Am I liked? Am I hated? And how do we reconcile with that sense of I'm here to do something in life. I'm here to actualize. I have action to do. I need to have courage and bravery and trust myself to act and live according to my purpose. But that can be very vulnerable, right? So we can feel actually afraid of action with Mars and Leo, or from a place of insecurity, we can become very self-oriented. There can be a very strong competitive nature in that Mars and Leo archetype. I need to win. I need to be first. I need to be the most important one because I don't actually know if I matter. And I want everyone to really kind of keep that filed in our mind as I continue this. The existential insecurity with Mars and Leo is like, what if I'm not important? What if I don't matter? Now, let's understand the nature of Leo and Aquarius in relationship. I think a good metaphor is to understand the relationship between a class of kids being at school and the individual kid. So each individual kid needs to be seen, they need to be celebrated and encouraged to be themselves, to actualize, to cultivate their unique purpose and individuality in life. And of course, they exist within the context of a community where not one kid is more important or special than the other, and they're all receiving the same social service. But what happens when we're in a community, when we're in the group? all kinds of things arise. Am I liked? Am I important? Am I special? Am I in? We have the Aquarius cliques and the groups that form. Oh, I want to be a part of that group. How do I have to act and how do I have to behave to be a part of that group, right? And we can, Pluto penetrate to the core and know how to get to the essence of that group or that clique and become the important one. Or we might feel so insecure that in order to affirm a sense of importance, we're going to learn how to bully or put down other people. So one of the dynamics that can emerge with a Leo Aquarius polarity in general are issues of belonging, not belonging. Am I important? Am I special? Am I a special one? Do people like me? Do I belong? Am I significant here? Am I an outsider? Does no one like me? Am I like the ugly one? Like Mars and Leo can be so deeply concerned with like, oh, is everyone looking at me? Relative to the fear. There can be an obsession relative to Pluto and Aquarius of like, where am I relative to the group and to the community? We can be so devastated in just being ourselves because we're hyper aware of how our vibration might be interacting. So we can suppress our individuality. We can learn how to put on a show. We can be hyper paranoid or consumed with what people might be thinking of us. And we can become manipulative. We can learn how to be the winner, be the important one, because we're so deeply insecure and afraid of not actually being important. And again, that existential fear of what if I don't matter? It's such a deep insecurity here. What if I'm not important? Now, let's take this and think about this in a political sense. Let's take just any group of people, right? Anywhere in the world, dealing with anything. There's always going to be an issue relative to the consensus reality of any particular country, nation, government. That's a Capricorn thing, like the structural reality, right? There are always going to be minority groups or subdivisions of society that don't fit in perfectly into the mainstream constructs or templates of society. And so many of these people might feel like, hey, no one's thinking about me. And it could be a group of people relative to their gender identity, a group of people relative to their minority race, a group of people relative to their unique health conditions that aren't being represented, veterans, workers of a certain industry, right? All these different groups that exist, and we can go on, there are infinite numbers of them. People from certain religious groups or certain backgrounds. And so there can be this sense of I'm different or I don't belong or I'm the only one of my kind in my community going to the school that I'm going to, or in my church, I'm the only one with this particular view or political affiliation or quality to my being. We can find ourselves feeling really alienated, underrepresented, unsupported. And this is where Pluto and Aquarius can be two traps or two dynamics. We can become very polarized relative to that sense of I don't belong, right? And then we find the group that we resonate with, and suddenly we feel like we found our identity. This is where I belong. And it's an interesting thing because very often there's a polarization. Like we might be very extreme in one area, be it a particular, very liberal, and then we realize our liberal friends don't really agree with certain things, and we feel confused, we feel alienated, and we become more conservative. We can do that with diet, right? An extreme dietary perspective, and then suddenly we realize we don't really fit into how other people are thinking of food, and we might go to the other extreme. And it's very common, whether it's to Pluto and Aquarius, to explore social identities in very extreme ways. Because wherever we're polarized, we're going to find there are parts of our being that are ostracized and not included. And it's always going to bring up at a certain point a sense of all of my being doesn't belong here. Right? So it can simply take, one political group speaking to that one thing that no one has spoken to. And you feel like, someone's finally addressing me. So we can become very polarized. And this is a part of the issue with Pluto and Aquarius. Whatever is not integrated, ultimately and inevitably wants to be included back in. So either it's going to create a perception of the people out there that are not me, or some inevitable moment in the future where I'm going to explore that thing that is right now other. Does everyone follow that basic construct? Whatever is alienated and not here, not integrated, if you think of Aquarius as being the fractal nature of reality, so all of the groups and the communities and elements of life are also inside of us. And the parts that we feel like we can't fit into, that are other, that we don't belong with, that are just too different and we can't accept them, fundamentally are components of our own whole being that wants to also be integrated. So we become very polarized in our social identity and beliefs and our sense of who we are and who we belong with relative to what we're suppressing and denying within ourselves. And then it's always going to show up as the event and the communities and the groups that we think are out there. So it just becomes inevitable. Some family member or friend is going to be that thing that you just can't accept. Or you're going to find yourself at some point going in the direction that you otherwise were absolutely committed to not go. So there can be a lot of social polarization. Now, let's bring in Mars and Leo, because we have that Mars and Leo dynamic, which is I don't feel important, I don't feel seen, I don't feel recognized. And so there are a few dynamics, and this is where I'll read from my notes, because there are a few archetypes that I want to flesh out as I express this, okay? So Mars and Leo wants to be important, wants to be seen relative to the Aquarian dynamics. I'm not represented by my group, or I feel politically or religiously or socially alienated. So we can have a dynamic where we then look up to a singular leader that becomes, quote unquote, the king, the representative, the spokesperson, the role model, the person to look up to for this community or for this ostracized part of yourself. And this individual can easily represent and even know how to draw upon your own psychological weakness, like where you don't feel included, where parts of your being are being ostracized. This Leonian archetype can easily be, I see you, you're important. Very much, a lot of politicians do this, but it just in the sense of how it's very easy. This happens romantically as well, right? We feel unloved, unseen, and someone comes along and is willing to love the part of ourselves that was rejected, but we don't necessarily know who they are or what their real motivations are. So relative to the part of ourselves that feels very vulnerable and unseen and unloved and uncared for, this leader can become a voice for a group of people that all share a similar resonance. Their existing psychological weakness can be seen and understood by someone who is brave enough to fight for them. So this really does then create strong polarization rooted in a sort of us versus them. And this means that Mars and Leo will want to win at all costs. If we see that, those people over there are undermining you, but follow me, I'm going to protect you. I'm going to give you everything that you want. It's speaking to that part of ourselves that is alienated or ostracized. So when we see the other as thus bad or evil or in some way antithetical to our own actualization and our existence, then we will justify our actions and any actions on the basis of feeling that it is our destiny or right to win no matter what, that all fighting is worth the cause. Because whenever we really believe that there are people out there that are in some way threatening to limit or suppress our nature and our individuality, it's going to bring up that Mars in Leo, there's a pride. I'm not important. I do matter. And I'm going to protect and defend my community. And again, it just takes the right kind of Mars and Leo role models. Let me speak a little more to that. An issue with Leo in general, and I see this all the time, and it's actually really emphasized with Mars, or even like when Pluto is involved with Leo as well. Leo will oftentimes gravitate towards role models. Or just think about like Hollywood stars, right? How we can idealize stars and actors and people that are famous, right? Like we look up to them. Children will dress up as their favorite, movie character and things like that. These are icons that represent sort of archetypally these like awakened, unique, creative potentialities that exist within us. And we always have a tendency to do that. We're looking up to people that shine, that illuminate, that are radiant, and that in their creative actualization, we see in them something that we can become. The issue then becomes where we displace our own self-actualization onto that person. And so that person seeing us, that person stoking our ego, that person, they wrote back my letter, they responded to me, they answered my email, they commented on my YouTube comment, they responded to my Twitter, they actually are addressing my, where a person can be given a lot of power and importance relative to how they're representing the parts of ourselves that are not being actualized or seen. Right? And that can be used and sort of misused in very manipulative ways. Mars in particular, because Mars is about leadership. Mars is about, I need the freedom to act and be myself and move forward in whatever ways I need. And so it can take simply one person that's courageous enough to go first and say, I am doing the thing that no one else is doing. And that can become a point of rallying a lot of people. It can be a very positive thing, right? Like one courageous leader that's inspiring the masses. We have that during wars. We have that during any strong activism. One person that says, everyone, this is important. We're going to do this. And yeah, this is important. Let's do this, right? But it can also be a cause for intense manipulation where one individual knows how to work with the psychological weakness of an entire population of people. And it's really something to be aware of, because when we're deeply invested in what we believe to be our cause, and then there's the momentum of an entire group, almost anything becomes justified. And that leads me to the next point. Defending freedom and fighting for your group. Sometimes it just takes enough people giving voice to the parts of us that feel underrepresented or suppressed for us to then feel seen and that we actually finally belong. Like on one level, this is how the devil finds its victims, appealing to the weakest places on the premise of offering some sense of long-awaited for belonging. People will thus become so identified with their group and their cause that they will be willing to engage in violence or even die for the cause. So I've kind of said this already, but let's think about the idea of dying for your cause. This is like the idea of being a kamikaze fighter. If you are so committed, I'm fighting for freedom. I'm fighting for something that is against those that are against me or against us. And because of that, there's a sort of, nobility. Mars in Leo is the beautiful qualities of Mars in Leo is the courage and the nobility of being able to do the brave thing, even if that means dying for it. And that can also, of course, be misdirected if we're in a very polarized state of mind. But it's very important to realize the extent to which with these energetics, people will feel deeply rallied and justified to do whatever they believe is noble and worth the cause. So us versus them. Strong self-protection and pride associated with one's cause. Perceptions of me and my people relative to some external threat that needs to be eliminated. Becoming radicalized to fight and defend something based on noble principle. Fighting for our freedom. Aquarius can reflect where some groups of people will perceive other groups of people as oppressive or regressive and will thus justify violence or attack. So again, I'm repeating that point here. And I think it's really helpful to understand that when we're dealing with these archetypes, there's a process of becoming radicalized. Right? Many souls will become radicalized. I think many souls will become radicalized to kind of give up on, being identified with the political polarity. Many souls will become radicalized within a particular political movement or become radicalized relative to feeling disenfranchised from a particular political group and join the other political group. And we have all kinds of mixtures of dynamics. But whenever our consciousness is deeply polarized, again, almost anything becomes justifiable. Okay, so I've made a lot of these points already. Here's another one. So Mars in Leo is driven to establish its own self-importance. And relative to Aquarius, when we combine this need for importance with a compulsion to penetrate to the heart of the group, of a collective, we can have the situation of really feeling like I'm standing for something and I'm fighting for all of us, right? This is where more people are, brave enough to say during Thanksgiving dinner, I'm voting for this person, even though it's different than who everyone else in your family is going to vote for. And it brings up the sense, can I stand for who I am and what I'm radicalized about and still be accepted by my family and still be accepted by my community? And here's one of the main issues that I would really want to emphasize. We've been seeing this, and this will probably intensify / also potentially heal. These are two expressions during this Mars-Pluto opposition in Leo and Aquarius. Sort of irreconcilable differences. Well, I can't be friends with that person anymore because of, well, they can't accept me, or I don't agree with their perspective. How can they vote for that when I'm fighting for this cause? Or I can't talk to my family anymore because I've become so radicalized, or I believe in this thing that they just can't accept or understand. It's so important that we don't reject our friends and our family because they have different political or social views or ideologies than ourselves. And if people are doing that to us, again, there's an invitation to recognize, where is my own pride getting in the way? Because when we begin rejecting each other and actually living in this consciousness of separation, where it's like us versus them, to the point where we're willing to deny our own community, our own friends, our own family on the basis of difference, we're missing the whole point, right? It actually becomes fighting for this idea of freedom for its own sake, but it's not freedom. Because freedom is when we can all be here together as we are and recognize, okay, here's difference. Even if our political ideologies and views feel intensely and drastically different, come back to the analogy of kids in school. In the end of the day, we're all in school here. We all got to show up on time for class. We all have homework. And we all go to recess together. This is a literal and metaphorical example for we are all souls on this journey. No one is better than another. No one is more right or more justified than another to act in violence and anger. Now, of course, we're all going to do what we feel to do. I think that's just sort of a part of it. But what I suggest is try not to further the social alienation. On this evolutionary journey, I think we sometimes find ourselves experimenting with these polarities that I spoke about. And as we do that, we're going to become naturally more and more aware of division. And it might feel hard, but that's actually a sign of healing. Like, as parts of ourselves that were otherwise not integrated are in process of integration, it creates for a time a heightened perception of polarity. We become more aware of really that which we hadn't prior seen before. So we might feel a little more polarized for a time, and that's where we run into the trap of becoming very fixated on a particular idea. But every time we become absolutely zealous about something, it's an indication that we've dissociated from some part of our whole being. If we can grasp this, we can see that the other side, or the other person who used to be your friend, is never and is not different than you. Like you, they are trying on the 10,000 ways of being human, which includes a very colorful expression of ways of thinking that are all just temporary experiments in identity. Everything moves. And I think we have a tendency to act as if what's happening right now is always what's going to happen and is always going to be this way, but it never is, right? Our social identity doesn't ever truly define us in an ultimate sense. Our political affiliation doesn't really define us in an ultimate sense. None of these things define us. They're just part of a journey. And so there's a medicine for being a part of this world. And many of us will feel called to be in activism. We're going to all do what we're going to do. And there's zero judgment or opinion on that, because Mars says you got to act. And we're going to act upon relative to what we feel charged and important to act upon. And we're going to do it. We're going to play it out. It's like that whole, question, like, who is better, Gandhi or Ramana Maharshi? Ramana Maharshi spent his time up on a mountain, didn't get involved in the world, whereas Gandhi got involved in the world. And the answer is they were just walking their path. They were each doing what they needed to do on their own evolutionary journey. And I say often, Mars is a self-cleaning oven. You got to act. You got to move through the process and play it out completely. And you got to be authentic about it. But I think the point is to play it out and really become more and more progressively aware of, is this really taking me where I want to go? So there's medicine in being in the world. And if we can learn this, learning to take things lightly. Otherwise, we get all worked up about nothing. Seriously. And in the end, we do realize that it was all nothing anyway. Like when we're dying, right? Like we're left with nothing. And we look back at our life and we ask ourselves those greater questions, like, what was it for? What was really important to me, right? Was it really worth all of the tension, all of the division, all of the stress, all of the polarization? it's all passing. So when we're in this window with Mars-Pluto, things that I would really want to bring forward is pay attention to both where you feel your pride is being offended, your sense of importance, and where it's very easy to move into a state of social and political and familial polarization. The higher expression here is to be true to ourselves, but what are the noble principles that we're here to live by? The moment we demonize someone else for their views is a moment we're maybe missing the point of what it is we're truly fighting for. Another point that I want to bring forward here is, and this is, it's not a prediction in terms of who is going to win, but I think right now what's emerging are deeply rooted, unresolved trauma that's being kicked up right now, where many people don't feel empowered, where they feel ignored, ostracized, neglected, where people feel that their dignity and rights to exist are under threat. Many of these people are being radicalized now to act and speak up in the ways that they think are important. Again, that's great on one level, but in extreme cases, it can speak to those very violent polarizations. And everyone's going to relate to this. Just think about men and women, to give an example. And I think in many ways, the two main political parties might trigger a lot of different content for many men and many women. Donald Trump, who in my opinion has not been a respectful person to women in general, and his utter disregard for the feminine, and this is of course me expressing my opinion, which I'm not going to hide, right? Just how I perceive him, naturally will be very triggering and has been very triggering to a lot of women, also to people that care about the environment. He has zero concern with any kind of environmental protection or caring for the earth and things like that. So that can feel very alienating and unsafe and triggering for a lot of people. Now, at the same time, Trump is also appealing to a lot of men, because a lot of men, believe it or not, have been ostracized and suffering in very silent ways. And that might be a hard thing to speak to relative to the nature of patriarchy and all of the abuse and violence that men have perpetuated. And yet, guess what the highest rate of suicide is in the US amongst men, 3 or 4 times more than women. And I think it's one of the leading causes of death, and in particular, white men. White men killing themselves is one of the highest forms of death in the US right now. That says something about the suffering of white men. And so a lot of men don't know what to do. They don't know what to do with their masculinity. They don't know how to be seen or how to cultivate or develop themselves in healthy ways. And so again, that Mars in Leo can be, oh, here I'm being seen, I feel encouraged. And this is like one of those stories where like the weak person that's being bullied and trying their best, right? At some point they become the villain because they just got to a point of being so victimized that something or some opportunity or possibility emerges for them and like they can have this power now. It's very easy to be deluded. And I'm just going to say this for all people. It's very easy to be deluded by the possibility of here's an opportunity for power, for representation, for being seen, relative to a deep internal sense of weakness and disempowerment. And, I'm not saying that I am the biggest fan of Kamala Harris either. I'm just very clear about my opinion on Donald Trump. And I have a video on my YouTube channel, on the EA Zoom meetings from 2016 where I analyzed his chart and offered my perspective on the nature of his soul. And of course, he has Mars in Leo. And so I'm sharing this not because I'm trying to advocate for a particular political orientation. I'm sharing this because I feel pretty clear in my conscience to just be authentic about how I perceive this soul and how he is kind of reflecting and holding many of these social dynamics in a very clear way. He has Mars in Leo in the 12th house relative to Pluto in Leo in the 12th. In my view, this soul actually has a deep, deep desire to establish an existential, never-ending sense of importance that actually, at the core, needs to place his own self as the most important thing ever, which is the thing you can't reach. It's almost like in fight with God. The underlying insecurity within his soul is actually in a deep internal sense of littleness and smallness and weakness, and thus an underlying psychological fixation and commitment to never be undermined and to never lose at all costs. And I actually think it's very important to see that clearly. And this is a part of why I'm apparently called to speak about my perception of his soul. This is also being in the 12th house. We're looking at the archetype of deception. I think Marianne Williamson spoke about it accurately when she said, like a salesperson that can get in front of a room of people and convince all these people. I've been to this retreat once, the Millionaire Mind Intensive. They actually quoted Donald Trump and they were friends with him back in 2008. And it's a very Leo Aquarius, right? A whole group of people that want to become more successful in their business. And they're inspiring you and motivating you. And obviously, in the end, it's a free intensive, right? But in the end, they want to hook you in, and they do hook you in, to take their thousands of dollars courses that will absolutely train you to become a mastermind, business coach, moneymaker, whatever, right? I was hooked into it to the point where after the retreat, I got sober and I was like, I don't have that money. I don't have that money to pay for that I just put on my card. And I was able to talk to them and get the refund, but it was hard to get the refund. But what they're doing is we got these actualized people on stage, and then, they have individual interactions with you. I was actually called on stage, and this guy was like, you're really talented. You have a lot of potential. And I felt seen. I felt encouraged. I mean, it was a real experience. I was crying. I was meeting a lot of deep places inside of my soul, but it hooks you. And I see things like that as being very manipulative, where you're trying to motivate a large group of people by way of being able to speak to where people don't feel empowered and saying, follow me and give me all of your trust and your money and your devotion, and you'll become this thing that you can become. That to me is the misuse of that Mars and Leonian energy. And I believe that this soul is actually pretty successfully deceiving an entire nation. It's a pretty profound thing to do. And this is regardless of any policies that may or may not make sense to me or to others. The nature of his soul, in my perception, relative to that Mars, Leo, Pluto in the 12th house, is fundamentally his bottom line is in winning. And so there's a quality of deception. And this Mars is actually right there. It's being deeply activated. And even later in this year, we're going to have a Mars return. All of these core soul dynamics are going to be activated for this soul as well. So this is where we have a literal person kind of symbolizing, in part, this Mars and Leo, Pluto and Aquarius polarity. And this is where I think we need to be mindful of how easy it will be for many souls to feel very polarized in extreme ways. Again, when you really believe in someone and the cause that they're fighting for, and what you believe you're fighting for, what part of yourself has been underrepresented or unprotected or under-acknowledged, it can justify nearly anything. Okay, so I want to close this on a more of a positive note. And if there are any questions, I would love to hear them. So I'll quickly go through the comments so I can address them for you. If you have any questions, please be welcome to type them in here since I'm doing this live. On a positive note, what is the gift and the possibility during this time? At the core, it is an opportunity to strengthen our courage and our capacity to be who we are, no matter what that looks like. There's a need to cultivate a sort of objectivity and detachment in simply being the person that we are, unique vibration, bringing that vibration out into the world, whatever that is. Whatever that expression is. It doesn't always mean being out in the public. That's not everyone's dharma. But we all have a path to cultivate. And look to see, and I'll do more Mars, Pluto through the houses to offer more guidelines for actually interpreting this in your own chart. But tune into where is this Mars? And where is the sun in your own chart? See, the natal position of your sun will speak to your soul's purpose. That sun sign is where we need to feel confidence in ourselves. We need to feel a natural entitlement and deserving to exist. So what is your life's purpose? Every planet in the natal chart literally is integrated through the life-giving energy of the sun, which says, I'm here in this human experience, now in this lifetime, with a purpose. I need to believe in myself. Without that confidence to really trust and believe in myself, nothing happens. Nothing moves. So learning to just be yourself. What is calling you? And two, let me find the right words for this. to notice where we might be trapped in the energy of comparison. I mean, other people are doing better, or other people aren't going to like me, or they don't understand me. All the different traps that the mind can fall into relative to thinking of ourselves in relation to who other people are, what they say, what they do, right? To stay committed to interpreting those perceptions as an invitation back into our own soul, to strengthen and realign with the work that we are here to do. And I'll speak for myself. I am this, this Leo is, what is it? I think it's in my, I forgot what house it's in. No, it's, it's in my 11th house right now. Yeah, that's right. It's in my 11th. So I have Leo, Mars and Leo in my 11th house, okay? I am making efforts to grow my business, my YouTube channel. You can say a YouTube following or community, right, is an 11th house thing from the perspective of what is the community that you're resonating around yourself, right, that you form. So Leo in the 11th is, who am I as a figure on YouTube? This is actually a part of my own soul development that I've disowned for many years. But now that I have a family, I've grown into a recognition I need to become more success-oriented, which then pushes me to say, what are my gifts? How can I actualize and bring more of myself forward? So this means allowing myself to be seen, which then means to bring forward more of my nature, more of my individuality. One second here. The stress in that signature, and I'll repeat this during my Through the Houses video, is who do I need to be to belong, right? What are the cool things to talk about? What are, right? How will everyone like me? How can I be the person, the astrologer that people, right? Instead of growing myself and developing myself according to who I am and my own nature. And the trick is to not compare, not look at what other people do. How do other astrologers do it? For a while, many astrologers were doing these like election videos, and I listened to a few of them because I am very curious to see like what are people predicting. And I have my own thoughts that I'm not going to share here because that doesn't feel necessary or helpful or relevant to my sense of purpose. Like I don't want to distract us into going into Ari Moshe's predictions. So I was watching, and there was something in these souls doing these videos that elicited a feeling like I'm missing out on something. Like, am I supposed to do? I'm like, I don't think that's my dharma. I don't feel called into that. But naturally, I came to but here's something I want to speak to. I do want to speak to the energetics of the elections and speak to what I feel is emerging right now relative to these soul dynamics and everything that I spoke about in this live stream. But that's a matter of me coming from the courage and the trust in what's true and alive for me. So we need to embrace that and learn how to interpret and internalize differences and not get sucked into inferiority, superiority, better than, less than, those people, I want to be like that person. I want to be like that person. Be like yourself and trust the journey, trust the process. I will say, and this is the extent to which I'll give a prediction, I don't think their election, we'll see, I don't really know, but I don't think the election results will be clear immediately. I would not be surprised if it's actually going to take a couple months, like even up until around inauguration, because of these transits, right? It's like around the election time, and I'm glad I'm saying this at the end of I don't want this to be like the focus of it, right? It's just a thought, and I could be wrong. But I'll share the chart again just so you can see what I'm talking about, why I'm saying this. So, just around the time of the election, Mars is still moving to station retrograde. So, like Mars is the king or the inauguration of the leader, right? But there's a retrograde process happening. And so relative to Pluto, which will then be in Aquarius, there's something that's being held up. And I think there can be a lot of reactivity, a lot of, again, all the things you might expect to see relative to these dynamics I've spoken about. Whatever the results are, whether they're conclusive or not, I don't think it's going to land as a conclusive, clear-cut decision in terms of like who's going to win for a while. And I think there will likely be a lot of reactivity and calls into action, Whenever a planet is getting ready to station retrograde, it's like that planet's going into ceremony. And that planet's getting ready to go into a big medicine ceremony. Something's being worked out. So the otherwise clear movement and the directiveness of Mars is going within. Something's reworking itself, something's healing. And on an ultimate level, all of the polarizations and things that can be emerging are a part, ultimately, of a greater process of unification. There's a greater Taoist teaching that I absolutely love this teaching. A man that I was sort of fated to meet when I was like 20 years old, and just sort of beginning to blossom, right, spiritually. An acupuncturist who was deeply connected to Taoist knowledge. He shared this teaching that before integration, there's a Taoist teaching that polarization happens. And I've never forgotten that, because I think about that in my own like personal human relationships, or like how I feel about myself, or in relation to any project or what's happening in the world. Things often seem really, really bad and really polarized just before integration. And that makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because in order for integration to happen, all disparate elements that are not yet integrated need to be completely clear as day. Everything needs to be seen and absolutely evident, so that there's nothing hidden below the threshold of awareness, right? And then integration can happen. But it will often feel like during these periods of polarization that it's just like hard and bad, but it's often a part of a larger process of unification. I think it's really helpful to recognize that. If we can recognize that while in the midst of it, we can actually cultivate less reactivity, become less invested in the seeming drama and immediacy of whatever polarizations or tensions we feel with other people or with life or with society, So those are my predictions, if you want to call it that I think things will take some time to become conclusive, and a lot of energy is going to be stirring up. And so with that, I think, the teaching is stay strong, stay committed to who you want to be. Earnestly want to know how you can show up and actualize your joy, your heart, your courage, your gifts in a way that really inspires and brings more of us into a more congruent and unified way of being. I received a dream not long ago where I was told, in regards to a specific situation, but it was strong enough that I think it's a universal teaching. Reject separation, accept the unity. It's like accept the fact of unity. Reject the temptation of separation. I just love that. What is it like to do you, be yourself, walk your path, but to stay committed, even when we stray, which we do, to stay committed to I'm here to accept and commit to the truth, to the fact of unity, not give into the trap. And it's a trap. There are memes out there. There are popular sayings. There are Facebook quotes. There are popular Instagram viral videos that will all in their own way encourage and celebrate separation. Show them who you are, walk away, or don't take any of this. It's sort of highlighting and emphasizing this pride, like you're better than them. And I think we often confuse self-respect and healthy boundaries, right? Being in right relationship with this unnecessary element of hate and rejection. One issue with cancel culture, when we're just like canceling people that do bad things, we end up pushing people away in their wholeness, and we don't allow other people to just be infallible souls that are on this journey of growing and learning, just like me and you. We're all figuring this out. So whenever we fall into the trap of separation and I can't accept this person or these people, we're confusing self-respect and dignity and self-honor, which is important with Leo. Like, we never will allow ourselves to be disrespected, but we confuse that with a sort of egoic pride that needs to push others away in order to lift ourselves up. That's never healthy. Okay, so let me see if there are any questions here that I can address. Thank you all so much for joining me. I'm really, really grateful to get to share this with you. Can you give such an essential reading for a regular person? Yeah, I mean, that's what I do. That's what I do. I give readings. Okay, wonderful. All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining. And a couple announcements to end. So as I mentioned, my Planet Square the Nodes class series begins really soon. I'll put that in the description. You can purchase individual classes. I have my self-study training program, which is also available. We begin a live cohort in March, but you can also purchase this program any time of the year as a self-study and then upgrade to the live program in March. And as always, I'm available for one-on-one sessions and long-term discounted soul-to-soul companionship sessions for those that want to work with me long-term. All right, everyone, thank you so much.